Ever since the start of the Champions Tour, we've seen dramatic innovations in the meta. So in this video, we're going to be breaking down the new meta tier list, talking about the best and worst agents, characters that pros are trying and succeeding with, and strategies that you can incorporate in your games to give yourself a leg up on the competition. Now, first up, I do want to talk about the D tier. And these are two characters that are actually being experimented with, and they have potential to move up this list. But right now, they don't have the pick rate to justify a higher placement. But I do want to talk about first Deadlock. Now, Deadlock was being experimented with by Pro Team EG on maps like Icebox and actually doing really well. It looked incredibly impressive for them to shut down enemy teams with Deadlock, but one of the things that we saw is as enemy teams got more and more used to dealing with the Deadlock, they were able to adapt and overcome it. That being said, it proved that Deadlock is viable on Icebox, and especially in ranked play, I think that Deadlock can be that sleeper pick that opponents don't know how to play around. But on other maps, it's going to be more powerful Sentinels, even though the Sentinel meta is shaking up quite a bit, but we'll hit that a little bit later. Now, the next character in the D tier I do got to talk about is Phoenix, and I almost didn't want to put him here, and you would know in the past I put him in the rank superstar tier, a rank given to characters that don't have a place in pro play, but they only have a place in ranked play. And Phoenix has always been this character that has been an all-star in ranked, but in pro play has been lacking. Although Loud, one of the best teams in North America, has been slaughtering teams, specifically with Phoenix, on maps like Ascent, Sunset, and Bind. And the way that they're doing this is by specifically abusing the fact that Phoenix can get ult very quickly with only 6 ult points needed. You play the map, you fight for control of certain orbs, and all of a sudden you're getting like 1 to 2 free orbs around. Your Phoenix gets a couple of kills in a joint engage, and you're farming a Phoenix ult every like 3 rounds. That can literally win an entire freaking round for you by itself. You're going to be able to bait out tons of utility, you're going to be able to gather information, and you're going to have someone to entry on the point that can even get kills. So it's incredibly strong, and I think it's something that a lot of people in ranked play need to abuse more. The fact that this is the character with the fastest ult possible, and it's one of the strongest ults. If you even have a slightly good game on Phoenix, you can chain a pop-off round into an ult round, into a pop-off round, into an ult round, and it could just snowball out of control. So he's still phenomenal for ranked play, but the fact that we're seeing him in meta play being experimented with, and teams are succeeding with it, and top teams are using it to win, means that I think Phoenix has some potential here to move up the rankings as an anti-meta pick. But speaking of anti-meta, understanding the meta and the anti-meta comes down to one simple click. SkillCapped.com has everything you need to master the meta, improve your game sense, positioning, aim, and everything you need to dominate your games and lobbies and quickly climb the ranks and even your premier games as well. Valorant is getting more and more competitive, and you don't want to get left behind, and with SkillCapped, we'll level you up right away. And with our money back guarantee, if you don't climb and improve, you don't pay. So what are you waiting for? Check it out right now down below. Now, one character that's been having a pretty rough time in the meta is Sage. Even on Icebox, her pick rates has slipped to the point where she doesn't really see any play right now. And we can't even blame that on the map pool anymore, because we talked about it before when Icebox was out of the map pool, but now that Icebox is here, she's still seeing no play. Even Deadlock is seeing more play than her. And overall, that's really bad for the character. Now, this character still has a really high win rate in ranked play and is still doing fine, and you can win with her in ranked, but for pro play, her utility doesn't quite transfer into enough value, and I think that many of the nerfs that have been given to her over the years could probably be reverted in one way or another. But let me know down below, how would you buff Sage to make her more viable on other maps in comparison to some of the other picks? Now, the last character in D tier we definitely got to talk about is Neon, another character that isn't seeing substantial play right now. And this is not necessarily a fault of Neon as a whole. It's more so the fact that Neon has only seen consistent play on Fracture, which is currently out of the map pool. That being said, I think a more fundamental problem exists with Neon, which is if you are playing her, you're sacrificing either Raze or Jett, one of the two. And I do think that when you have a character that requires an initiator like Breach to set her up to get value, even if it comes at a different like target in the meta, it doesn't make sense to justify picking that over the really tried and true powerful duelists that just don't require the same level of setup or are more flexible with their engagements. Now, moving on up, we definitely do got to talk about the C tier, and the first character I do want to talk about is Chamber. Now, Chamber did recently get buffed, but it didn't dramatically change his pick rate around all that much. much. He still is seeing some play, but due to the power of a lot of the Sentinels right now at the high end, he's not seeing play even on his previous good maps. Maps like Breeze and Lotus have been dominated by Cypher specifically due to the power of some of these really difficult to deal with trips. So you're basically put in a situation where you have to play Cypher, but you can't rock two Sentinels, Chamber and Cypher, because then you're really weak on attack and you lack a lot of options. You have to sacrifice something for that composition. So Chamber is kind of, picked a lot less relatively. He still sees a little bit of play here and there. Some maps like Lotus and Sunset, he's picking up a tiny bit of percentage points, but overall his power level is still pretty substantial. He does have potential, but I think some of these other Sentinels at the high end would have to be nerfed for him to see any play at all. The next off in the C tier, we actually have to talk about Yoru, a character that was experimented quite a bit, and the top team Sentinels used it quite a bit to some great success. Other teams used it as well, like G2, and I do think that Yoru is a bit of a sleeper pick. Now, there's a couple of requirements for Yoru. You need someone that is really good on the character, really comfortable on the character, not a character that random other duelist players can just flex to. They really need to know Yoru inside and out, and most of the time it's whipped out as an anti-meta strategy that keeps enemies guessing. You got to think about it how it works at the highest meta, where teams kind of expect certain compositions, so they prepare for it, but when you introduce a new variable, something like a Yoru, all of a sudden they have to completely readjust and build strategies around this character. And because you whip this out of the fly, sometimes you can steal games from teams that are just not prepared for you. Like maybe you play them again down the line and they're more expecting of some of these strategies, but you only need to win against them one time on one map to make it worth it, to justify it. And I do think that this is another reason why Yoru could be really good in ranked, because if you're a really good Yoru that understands your proper engagements, enemies might not go up against a great Yoru all the time, so they have to recalibrate. And if they don't know how you're engaging, what you're doing, and they get confused and lost, that's the easiest way to just completely mentally boom them and win a game. So not only is he seeing some anti-meta play in pro play, but it also exemplifies his strengths in ranked play as well. The next up, I do get to talk about Harbor. Harbor's mainly used as a double controller setup on maps like Breeze, and he does have a lot of potential to see more play overall. Right now, he's seeing a little bit of play on Breeze, Bind, Icebox, some of these maps, never as a solo controller, more as a double controller. Still really solid meta addition, still a powerful character, but not gonna reach the higher numbers of tier just because his pick rate is kind of lagging behind the rest of the characters on the roster. Now, moving up, we do gotta talk about B tier. First off, I do gotta talk about Astra. Astra's just a fantastic double controller as well. We're seeing a lot of value on Astra, specifically on split. That's pretty much all where she sees play, but she sees a substantial amount. About 50% is what she's seeing, and yeah, she's a really strong character and she gets value on that map, and that makes her a substantial meta pick. Doesn't mean that she's dominating every single map or anything like that, but she's still really strong in the situation she's good in, so she's at the bottom of B. Next up, I do gotta talk about Fade, and Fade is still a strong character, still seeing a little bit of play, especially on maps like Lotus, and could see more play in the future. One of the things about Fade that kind of pushed her down the list a little bit is, even after all the nerfs, Skye's still really strong, Gekko is looking very strong lately, Kayo is still really strong, and especially with all of this utility that needs to be busted, like Cypher trips, Sova is more important now than ever to be able to break that utility in a way that Fade can't do as reliably. So you combine all these factors together, and Fade is unfortunately just worse than many of the other options. Not that she's weak or anything like that, it's just relatively these other characters provide a little bit more value. Now, next up, we do gotta talk about Brimstone, and Brimstone's seeing a ton of pick rates, specifically on Bind. That's his best map by far, although we are seeing him sometimes on Icebox and some other maps with double controller setups. Overall, this is a rather light time with Brimstone, considering Fracture isn't in the map pool, but once that comes back, Brimstone's pick rate will skyrocket, and his tier on this list will go up respectively to that. Now, last up in the B tier, we do gotta talk about Breach. Breach sees a smattering of play. A lot of pro teams try Breach on different maps, Split Ascent, Sunset Bind, and really they will use him to take early aggressive space and try to set up something with a duelist. They typically do this a lot, and they'll do this on attack or defense. Oftentimes a team will run a Breach and take control of something super aggressive as a team, so that enemies either get caught off guard or their options are limited with rotation, because if you aggressively take A main, then all of a sudden they can't rotate back into A main because they don't know where you're hiding, you know, cubbies and things like that. So if you set up a joint play, aggressively taking A main, you might kill 2 people, or you might potentially put so much fear in the enemy team that they'll never rotate back there because you could leave someone planted there. And so the rest of your teammates can like really expect them the other side. That's just like a hypothetical of some of what these teams are doing, but it's not very consistent, his pick rate, right? He is seeing substantial play across maps, but he's not kind of convinced in the meta. He's not definitive. Some teams are experimenting with him, but overall he has a relatively light pick rate. Now, before we move on to A tier, I want to talk about the ranked superstars, characters that don't really see any play, but they are really, really good in ranked play if you're a mechanical god, or if you know exactly how to make the proper engagements to dominate. And these are ISO and Reyna, 2 characters that definitely require you to be on your game mechanically, but there's more to these characters than meets the eye. And if you check out SkillCapped, we have in-depth guides over Reyna specifically so that you could really level up your gameplay and climb. You're definitely gonna want to check that out. But yeah, these characters can dominate a ranked lobby and really climb you, but they're probably not gonna see any meta play for anytime soon. Next up, we do gotta talk about A tier, a pretty stacked tier, but a lot of these characters are seeing a lot of play and they're really good and they have a lot of potential. First off, I do want to talk about Gekko. And Gekko is just really looking good, especially after Skye has gotten nerfed. A lot of her pick rate has been given up. Gekko is seeing a lot of value, especially many of the top teams are trialing Gekko. And there's even these double initiator comps like Gekko and Kayo that Sentinels is running that is looking really, really good. And overall, Gekko is finally in a place where teams like him and they're playing him more and more. And I do think that he's a really good character and ranked as well. So definitely don't sleep on Gekko like he's been slept on for quite some time. And then next up, I do got to talk about Skye. I can't not talk about Skye because even outside of all of the nerfs she's received, she's still great. Like, her utility is just so good. On Split and on Bind, she's dominating, and she's seeing some pick rate here and there on most other maps. Skye is just a really, really powerful character, and it seems that all the effort to nerf her has affected the meta at large, but it hasn't made Skye, you know, bad, right? She's still a great character. She's still super strong. And it looks like that's not going to change anytime soon. Speaking of which, we do got to talk about Kayo. Kayo is just rolling on Ascent, always has maxed out pick rate on Ascent, but we're also seeing him dominating Breeze as well, and a lot more experimentation on maps like Sunset Bind and Icebox. I do think that Kayo has always been one of the best characters in pro play, and pro teams are adopting him now more than they have in quite some time. Now, for ranked play, he does have a rather harsh win rate overall, and I think it's really due to the fact that people don't synergize with Kayo very well, and people don't master Kayo enough. So definitely put in the hours, grind this character, and I think there's a lot of value in free games waiting for you. The next up, we do got to talk about Killjoy, and Killjoy is just a super solid sentinel. Nothing that is taking over the meta or anything like that anymore, but she still sees maxed at Icebox pick rate. She still sees a lot of Lotus pick rate and a lot of freaking Ascent pick rate. Now, there's other alternatives to her now. Before, she basically dominated Ascent. Teams only picked her on Ascent, but we're seeing some interesting different types of compositions that don't pick her nearly as much. They're either playing Cypher or they're playing something completely different. And she's still a really, really powerful character, but she isn't taking over the meta like she once was. Still A tier worthy though. Now, next off in the A tier, we do got to talk about Jett. Jett is still an all-star on Breeze, on Icebox, on Ascent. She's freaking dominant. She's nuts. We know how good Jett can be, and that hasn't changed. Raze is edging her out a little bit right now, but still, Jett overall is a very powerful character and the best opper, although we're seeing a lot more other characters op right now, not just Jett, but Jett is still one of the best oppers, very, very powerful, and yeah, definitely gonna be meta probably forever at this point. Next up, we do got to talk about Sova at the very tippy top of A tier. Sova is still seeing a ton of play. Breeze, Icebox, freaking a little Sunset, a little Ascent. So he is really needed a lot to deal with Cypher trips, and we'll talk about it a little bit, how the Cypher meta is changing because people are getting better at dealing with his utility. But Sova is like one piece of that is pretty reliable, and it's nice to be able to pressure out these trips and you don't have to peek into them, right? And Sova's really, really good at that. And he's always been a really strong character. So while he's not just having maxed out pick rate, he's still very, very powerful. Definitely deserving of upper A. Now, last up, we do got to talk about S tier, and these are the characters with the highest pick rates or the characters that have the craziest impact on the meta at large. And first off, I do got to talk about Cypher. And yeah, Cypher has kind of just warped the meta around him in a pretty meaningful way on Breeze, on Sunset, and he sees play on Ascent and on Split as well. And I do really want to note that teams have gotten a lot better at dealing with Cypher than they did in the past. Like when the buffs happened right away, we got to see a lot of matches against Cypher, and teams just fell over to Cypher. No one could beat Cypher. People just couldn't figure out the best strategies to deal with them, but now everyone's adapted. Even in ranked play, high level ranked play, and it's kind of trickling down, people are getting better at dealing with Cypher because they respect his utility more, and the meta is kind of solving itself, where Cypher isn't this end-all be-all psychopathic, impossible to deal with character. He's strong, but he does have vulnerabilities that teams are getting better at exploiting. The next up, I do gotta talk about Raze. I mean, it's hard not to when she's seeing almost 100% pick rate on Split, seeing tons of pick rate on Bind, Lotus, and Sunset. The best duelist right now, just narrowly edging out Jett and being really, really strong. I mean, it's hard to understate how much value this character can get. She has been consistently one of the strongest characters in the meta for quite some time, and she's been one of the best rank stompers as well. I have suggested Raze a million times to people. I do think that she's one of the best characters that you can learn. If you are someone that is locking ISO, Reyna, Neon, any of these characters where you're just trying to run it down, pop off, and get kills, just put that effort and time into Raze, and you will become absolutely cracked. I mean, Raze isn't easy to learn, but she gives you so much flexibility in movement, so much carry potential, and she's a meta pick as well. So if you start scrimming, playing in Premier, you're already set up for that. There's so much value that this character offers, and yeah, she's just amazing, so she definitely deserves S tier. Now, next up in the S tier, we do have to talk about Omen. Omen seeing literally perfect pick rate on Lotus, Ascent, Sunset, and still seeing some split pick rate as well, although as a dual controller setup, specifically with Viper. Now, Omen is great. We've talked about how Omen's great, but we're seeing variations to it that Sentinels and Tens and some other teams are innovating on, where Omen is getting a lot more active in these fights, right? He's using his utility, he's setting up his team, but then he's gonna teleport in. Then he's gonna go take an angle, take a play, fight for the objective. Not gonna lurk quite as much as he has in the past. Still lurking though. Marv is still out there doing his thing, but getting more proactive in these fights. Going in, teleporting in, trying to trade out your duelists after they satchel in or dash in, right? After you use your paranoia, after you use your smokes, your life doesn't matter nearly as much. You don't have to play as safe, as controlled, so you can go more proactive and try to aid your team in that aggressive pursuit, and Omen slotting right into that. But we have a last character. She's an S tier, but she's really should be in super S tier, because what the hell is this pick rate? I mean, she's being picked like 80% of the time right now on like every map. Maxed out Split, maxed out Bind, maxed out Breeze, maxed out Lotus. She's basically almost maxed out on every map but Ascent, and she still sees play on Ascent. There's not a map that she doesn't see play. Viper is taking over the entire meta. She's just that strong. And I've been saying in the past that until we get like a certified line smoker that actually competes with Viper directly, you know, we're not going to see a change in Viper on the map she's really good in. But now we're seeing a problem where she's so good that people are just playing dual controller setups on even the maps that she historically hasn't been that dominant in. And it's not just like Breeze and Icebox that she's popping off in, Breeze and Icebox and Split. It's every map. So maybe we have to think about maybe Viper is just too strong. I do want to pass the question off to you. Do you think Viper's here because of lack of competition? Or is she here because she's too strong? What would you suggest they do about it? Do you think they should nerf Viper? Do you think she's healthy for the game? Let me know down below. And definitely check out SkillCapped if you really want to level up your skills. Thank you so much for coming by. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.